When I first met Sophie, I never imagined that the bond we would share would one day be shattered. Back then, she was just a little girl with wide eyes and an awkward laugh. She had been the center of her mother's world, and I was just the guy who came into their lives. At first, Sophie had been cautious with me, understandable, given that I was her mother's new boyfriend, but over time, we had developed a solid, if not perfect, relationship. I had always done my best to be a good stepfather. I paid the bills, supported Sophie through her high school years, and even attended every recital, every soccer game, every birthday. For me, Sophie wasn't just a stepdaughter. She was a daughter. She was the child I never had, the one I wanted to protect and give every opportunity to succeed. Her mother, Anna, and I had been married for 5 years. It wasn't always smooth sailing, but we were a family. Or so I thought. It started with a phone call, a call that I should have been excited about, the kind of call parents get when their child is making a big decision. Sophie called me one evening while I was at work. "Dad," she said, her voice a mixture of excitement and nerves, "I'm getting married." I was taken aback, not because I wasn't expecting it, but because I hadn't thought about it. She had been seeing Ryan for a few years, and they seemed happy, but marriage? That was a big step. "That's amazing, Sophie. Congratulations," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Have you picked a date?" "We're thinking about next spring," she said. "We've been planning the details, and I'd love for you to help with the wedding. If you can." "Of course," I said. "Whatever you need, I'll be there. Just tell me what to do." I thought it was a good sign. Sophie was asking me to be involved. She wanted my help. I was elated, even if I knew it would be a financial burden. Weddings are expensive. But I didn't care. This was my daughter. This was a moment I'd gladly help her celebrate. "Thanks, Dad," she said, sounding relieved. "We're doing it at that big venue downtown. It's expensive, but I am sure we can manage it. After all, I am your only daughter." That should have been my first red flag. But I didn't catch it. I didn't want to. Sophie needed me. I could see it, she needed my support. And I wasn't going to let her down. A week after the phone call, Sophie came to me with the breakdown of costs. I was shocked by how much the wedding would cost. The venue alone was more than I could comfortably afford. But again, I pushed my doubts aside. I could make it work. I didn't want her to feel any pressure. This was her day, and I wanted it to be perfect. We met a few times over the next couple of weeks to go over the details: catering, flowers, music, the dress, everything. Sophie had a vision for her wedding, and I could see how important it was to her. She never mentioned her biological father, Ryan's family, or anyone else helping with the costs. It was all about me. She even sent me an email listing what I was expected to pay for, as if it were my responsibility to cover the bulk of the wedding. "Dad," she said, her eyes wide with excitement. "This is the most important day of my life. I want it to be perfect." And in that moment, I said, "Don't worry about the costs. I've got it." I thought that was it. I thought I was being a good father figure. I didn't question her. I didn't even bring up her biological father, Peter. I was simply trying to help, to make the wedding a day Sophie would never forget. The call came 2 weeks before the wedding. I had just finalized the payments for the catering and the venue, hoping everything would go smoothly. Sophie called me in the middle of the afternoon, and I could tell something was wrong. "Dad, can you meet me for coffee?" she asked, her voice shaky. "I need to talk to you about something." "Of course, Sophie," I said. My mind already racing. "What's going on? You sound upset." I don't know how to say this," she started, taking a deep breath. "But I've decided to make some changes to the wedding." "Changes?" I echoed, confused. "What do you mean?" "I'm uninviting you, she said, the words crashing into me like a wave. I'm sorry, but it's the right thing to do. I froze, unsure whether I had heard her correctly. Uninviting me? Sophie, what are you talking about? I've paid for everything. I'm here to support you. You can't just uninvite me. I have to, she said softly. I've decided I want my biological dad to walk me down the aisle instead. It's something I've been thinking about for a while. And I know it's what he wants too. The words felt like daggers. I couldn't breathe. I'd given everything for her. I'd sacrificed, stretched myself thin, and this was the thanks I was getting. But I've done everything for you, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I've paid for the venue, the catering, the flowers. I've been more of a father to you than your real dad ever was. I know, Dad, she said, her voice almost a whisper. But I need him there. He's the one who should be walking me down the aisle. Not you. You can't be serious, I said, my voice rising now. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? You're choosing him over me, after everything? I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't want to hurt you. I just need to make things right. I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded in my chest as I hung up the phone. Uninvited. It felt like my world was shattering around me. I had been there for Sophie every step of the way, and now she was cutting me out, choosing a man who had never been there for her. The betrayal was unbearable. That night, I confronted Anna, my wife. I needed answers. I needed to understand why Sophie had made such a decision. Anna, do you know what's going on? I asked. My voice thick with frustration. Sophie just uninvited me from her wedding. She wants her biological father to walk her down the aisle. Anna's face fell. I don't know what to say, Michael. This is all happening so fast. Sophie. She's trying to make things right with her dad. I think it's important to her. Important? I shouted. What about everything I've done for her? What about the wedding I paid for? I gave up everything to make this day perfect for her. Anna didn't have an answer. She just stood there, silently watching me unravel. I sat alone in the living room, the silence of the house pressing against my chest like a weight. The phone call with Sophie was still fresh in my mind. The words she'd said echoed in my ears, each one a cruel reminder of what I had been reduced to, a mere afterthought, discarded once she'd gotten what she wanted. Sophie. I did everything for you, I whispered to myself, feeling the burn of betrayal clawing at my insides. Everything, the anger I had been suppressing for days was slowly boiling to the surface. I had been the one to provide, the one who'd ensured the wedding plans went smoothly. I'd paid for the venue, the catering, the flowers, the photographer, everything. And now she wanted to erase me from her life as though I had never existed. It wasn't just the insult to my pride that hurt. It was the cold realization that I was nothing more than a financial tool to her, someone who could pay the bills and fade into the background. The more I thought about it, the more it sickened me. I couldn't let this stand. I would not quietly watch her walk down the aisle without me. If she wanted to sever ties with me so easily, I was going to give her a reminder of just who had been there all along. I could hear Anna moving around in the kitchen, her soft humming as she prepared dinner. It was the same routine, day after day. But today, my mind wasn't on dinner or anything trivial. Today, I was focused on my plan, and Anna wasn't going to stop me. I picked up the phone and dialed the wedding venue. It was time to set things in motion. Good evening, Mr. Alexander, the voice on the other end of the line greeted me with practiced politeness. How can I help you? I need to speak to the manager, I said firmly. It's regarding the payments and the upcoming event. A brief silence followed, and then the manager picked up. Mr. Alexander, what can I do for you? I've been reviewing the invoices and the agreements for the wedding, I said, making sure my voice was calm, measured. And I've decided to cancel the payments I've made so far. There was a pause on the other end. I'm sorry, Mr. Alexander, but we've already processed those payments. If there's an issue, we can discuss it with Sophie. No. I've decided to cancel them, effective immediately. If Sophie wants this wedding, she'll have to figure out how to pay for it herself. Another long pause. Mr. Alexander, are you sure about this? It's a significant change, and I would advise, I'm sure. Just make it happen. Don't charge anything else to my account. Do I make myself clear? The manager hesitated, but after a moment, he replied, understood, Mr. Alexander. I hung up, feeling a small spark of satisfaction in the pit of my stomach. That was just the beginning. The days after the call were a blur. I had to watch Sophie continue with her wedding preparations, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit her. It was hard to mask my feelings when she came to the house, talking excitedly about the big day, and I could barely bring myself to look at her without remembering how she had cut me out. But I knew what was coming. It wasn't just the cancellation of payments, it was the slow, devastating realization that she had to face the consequences of her actions. And as much as it pained me, I was determined to enjoy the fallout. Sophie, of course, hadn't yet realized the extent of what I had done. She continued to go about her business, assuming that everything was under control. But I knew better. The venue would start calling her soon enough, asking for payment. The photographers and the florist would be calling as well. I could already picture the scene in my mind, Sophie scrambling, trying to figure out how to fix the mess she had made. It came a week before the wedding. Sophie stormed into the house, her face red with fury. I had been waiting for this moment, knew it was coming. She had always been impulsive, driven by her emotions, and I couldn't wait to see her unravel. You! She hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me. What the hell did you do? I remained seated in the living room, my expression impassive. I didn't need to say anything. The silence was enough. Why would you do this? You promised to pay for everything. This is my wedding. You can't just pull the rug out from under me. Her voice trembled with the sting of betrayal, but I wasn't moved. You're right, I said coldly. I promised. But you took that promise and threw it in my face. You decided I wasn't good enough to even stand next to you on your wedding day. So now, you'll have to figure out how to pay for it yourself. She took a step back, her eyes wide with disbelief. You're insane. How could you do this to me? After everything I've done for you. Everything? I interrupted, my voice quiet but firm. You think you've done something for me? You've used me, Sophie. You've taken what I gave you and turned your back on me the moment your biological father came back into the picture. I'm done being the man who works in the shadows, paying the bills so you can live your fairy tale. I can't believe this, she whispered, her face pale. You're ruining my wedding. I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. No, Sophie. I'm not ruining your wedding. I'm just making you see the reality of your choices. You don't get to walk away from me, from everything I did for you, and expect no consequences. This is what happens when you throw people away. The next few days were a whirlwind. Sophie, frantic and increasingly desperate, had to deal with the fallout of her actions. The venue called, demanding immediate payment, and the caterers followed suit. Photographers and florists were starting to back out, refusing to go forward without payment. And all the while, I watched, knowing that she was realizing the enormity of what she had done. It didn't take long before she came to me again, this time with tears in her eyes. Please, she begged, her voice breaking. I didn't mean it. I was just so caught up in everything. I thought I could make everything work with Dad, but I was wrong. I'm sorry. Please help me. I don't know what to do. I looked at her for a moment, seeing the desperation in her eyes, but the bitterness that had built up over the past few days stayed with me. This wasn't just about her, this was about me, about making sure she understood the weight of her actions. I'm sorry, Sophie. The money's gone. You'll have to find another way. Maybe your father can help you. He's the one you seem to trust now. Her face crumpled, and she turned to leave, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the empty house. I didn't feel the need to chase after her. The plan had worked. She had learned, just like I had planned. The pain of being betrayed was something she would never forget. I could hear the door slam as Sophie left the house, her footsteps quick and panicked. Her cries echoed in the hallway, the sound of her heart breaking was almost palpable in the quiet of the house. It should have made me feel something, guilt, maybe, or regret, but there was nothing. I had no remorse. The plan had worked, and Sophie was getting a taste of the reality she'd helped create. I sat back in my chair, the weight of the situation settling over me like a cloak of cold indifference. Sophie would never be able to forget this. It wasn't just about money. It was about what she had done to me, how she had cast me aside for her biological father, thinking she could replace me and erase me from her life without consequences. I had given her everything, and she had taken it all for granted. But Sophie was learning now. The tables had turned. Sophie had barely left for an hour before the frantic phone calls began. First, it was the venue manager, then the florist, then the caterer. Each one demanding answers, each one reminding her that without payment, there would be no wedding. She had to face it now, the life she had built on my money was crumbling, piece by piece. The weight of it was too much, and I could almost picture her back in that desperate, helpless state. She must have thought that calling me for help again would fix things. But I wasn't going to help her. Not this time. It wasn't just the wedding vendors that were after her, though. The real blow came when she reached out to her biological father. Sophie sat on her bed, her phone pressed to her ear, her fingers trembling as she dialed her father's number. She had called him earlier in the week, telling him about the wedding preparations, the dress, the venue, and how everything was falling into place. But now, she needed him in a way she never had before. She needed him to come through, to help her. The man who had abandoned her for years, the man who had never once shown the slightest bit of interest in her life, was now the only person she could turn to. And that thought stung. The phone rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. Her heart sank with each passing second. Finally, he answered. Sophie. What's going on? His voice was cold, distant, as if they hadn't spent the last few months talking about her wedding. As if the years of neglect hadn't happened. Dad, I need you, she said, her voice cracking. I need help. The wedding's falling apart. Michael stopped paying for everything, he pulled all the funds, and I can't fix this on my own. I've tried. Please, can you help me? There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Sophie's heart skipped a beat. She held her breath, waiting for the answer that could change everything. Listen, Sophie, her father's voice finally came through, I'm sorry, but I can't help you. I'm not in a position to contribute to this wedding. I told you before, I've got my own responsibilities. My new family, my bills, you know how it is. Sophie's heart sank, her grip on the phone tightening. What? You promised. You told me that you'd help. Please, Dad, this is important to me. I've already lost Michael, and now the wedding is going to fall apart. I'm begging you. Her father sighed heavily, and she could almost hear him roll his eyes. Sophie, you need to understand something. I didn't sign up for all this. You know things aren't easy on my end. I'm just one person, and I've got my own family to support. But you're my father, Sophie pleaded, her voice breaking. You're the only one I have left. Please. There was a long silence on the other end, and for a moment, Sophie thought he might say something that would make everything better. But instead, the words that came next cut through her like a blade. You need to stop relying on other people to fix your problems, Sophie. I'm sorry, but I'm not your savior. I've got enough on my plate already. Good luck. Before Sophie could respond, he hung up. She stood there for a moment, phone still pressed to her ear, the words reverberating in her mind like a cruel echo. Good luck. That was all he had to say. The phone slipped from Sophie's hand, falling to the floor with a soft thud. She stood frozen for a long time, staring blankly at the phone, as if willing the words to somehow rewind themselves. As if she could undo what had just happened. The reality hit her like a ton of bricks. Her father had backed out. Again. He had always been a ghost in her life, there when it was convenient, absent when it mattered. But this time, he wasn't just absent. He was actively abandoning her when she needed him most. Her mind raced, 1,000 thoughts flashing through her. She had been so sure that he would help her, that he would make this wedding everything she had dreamed of. She had convinced herself that he cared, that he would step up for her, just this once. But now, the truth was glaringly clear. He didn't care. He never had. Sophie's world began to fall apart in front of her eyes. The calls from the wedding vendors grew more urgent. The caterers had threatened to cancel, and the venue had given her a deadline. The photographer had refused to even show up without payment. And every time she called me, I refused to take her calls. I was no longer her safety net. She thought she could throw me aside and replace me with her biological father. She thought that the man who had abandoned her for years would suddenly become the father she had always dreamed of. But she had been wrong. Her father was never going to step up. He had never been the man she wanted him to be, and he never would be. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction as I thought of Sophie struggling. She had turned her back on me without a second thought, and now she was facing the consequences. But it wasn't just about her pain, it was about teaching her a lesson, making her realize that family isn't something you can toss aside when it's convenient. As the days passed, I watched the chaos unfold from a distance. Sophie, scrambling for solutions, reaching out to anyone who might help her, only to be met with rejection. It was the fallout from her own decisions, and she was slowly starting to understand the weight of what she had done. The bitterness I had felt for so long was turning into something else now, something almost satisfying, almost sweet. But this wasn't over. Not yet. Sophie had a lot more to learn, and I wasn't about to let her off easy. The days after Sophie's call to her biological father felt like an eternity. Every time I heard her voice crackling through the house, desperation lacing her words, I couldn't help but feel a rush of vindication. She had thought she could play both sides, lean on me for everything and then turn her back on me when it suited her. But that false sense of security had vanished the moment I had pulled the rug out from under her. It had been almost a week since she tried to call for help. And still, nothing. The vendors had given her every ultimatum they could, and every promise she'd made was slipping away like sand through her fingers. I could hear the silence in the house when she came home at night, no phone calls from excited wedding planners, no plans with her father to save the day. Just her, alone, coming face to face with the mess she had made. It wasn't my problem anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. But it was hard to ignore her spiraling situation, especially when I knew that every moment of her panic and frustration was the direct result of her own choices. Every tear she shed was because of her decision to push me aside and put all her faith in a father who had shown time and time again that he wasn't worth her trust. It all came to a head one afternoon when Sophie finally reached her breaking point. I had been sitting in the living room, watching the news, when I heard the front door slam. It was Sophie. She stormed in, looking pale and frantic, her face a mixture of anger and hurt. She was clutching her phone tightly, as though it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart completely. I didn't even look up at first. It wasn't like I didn't already know what was coming. Michael. Her voice cracked as she shouted my name. You've ruined everything. I begged you. I begged you to help me. How could you do this to me? I set the remote down and met her gaze, calmly setting the phone down on the coffee table. You've been so sure that your biological father would come through for you. You thought I was your backup, didn't you? That no matter what, I would be here to fix it all. Well, I'm not your backup, Sophie. I'm not here to save you from the mess you created. Her face turned bright red with rage. You think this is my fault? You're the one who stopped paying. You're the one who took away everything I had worked for. You know I can't afford this on my own. I don't have anyone else to turn to. You never gave me a chance to be the father I've been to you all these years, I replied, leaning back in my chair, unfazed. You pushed me aside when you decided to play the daddy card with him. He's the one you wanted, not me. And now you see that he's no more reliable than the last time he walked out on you. I wasn't the one who failed you, Sophie. I'm not the one who abandoned you for a second chance at a life that isn't even real. Sophie's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, I could see the realization dawning on her. She had been clinging to the idea of a perfect father, someone who would come in and make everything better. Someone who would erase all the mistakes she had made. But that fairy tale wasn't going to happen. I tried, she whispered, almost as if she were speaking to herself more than to me. I thought if I got him involved, he'd care. I thought maybe if I gave him a chance, he'd step up. But now everything's falling apart. I didn't have any sympathy left. Not for her. Not after everything. You've learned a hard lesson, Sophie. You can't just rewrite your history. You can't trade the people who have been there for you for the ones who never cared. It didn't take long for Sophie to make her next move. She called her biological father once again, this time more desperately than before. I could hear her on the phone, her voice muffled from the other room as she pleaded for him to come through. I didn't need to hear the exact words, her tone said it all. She was begging. Her pride had taken a back seat to the reality of her situation, and she was willing to swallow her hurt and resentment just to make the wedding happen. But it was no use. Her father's response was as cold and distant as before. No, Sophie. I told you already. I can't do this. You need to figure it out on your own. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. Sophie's shoulders slumped. I could hear the shakiness in her breath as she struggled to hold it together. The line went silent for a long moment. Then, she hung up, her head dropping as the tears finally spilled out, her sobs echoing in the otherwise empty house. It was then that Sophie made her last desperate attempt to fix everything. She called me, but this time, her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't demanding. It was soft, fragile, filled with regret. Michael, she whispered, her voice hoarse. I don't know what to do. Everything's falling apart. I've called everyone. I've tried. Please, can you help me? I could hear the hurt in her voice, but it wasn't enough to change my mind. The coldness I had cultivated in the last week settled back in as I placed the phone to my ear. Sophie, I began, each word deliberate and firm, I gave you every opportunity to make things right. You could have included me, you could have been honest, but you chose to push me aside. Now, you'll have to face the consequences of that choice. I'm not going to clean up the mess you created. She was silent on the other end, and for a moment, I wondered if she finally understood. Finally understood the weight of her actions and the cost of her decision. But then, the words I had been waiting for came. I was wrong, she said, barely above a whisper. I shouldn't have treated you like that. I thought I could just fix things with my dad. I thought he would step in and everything would be okay. But I see now. I see now that I was wrong. I should have been there for you. I should have trusted you. I let her words hang in the air for a moment before replying, it's too late for apologies now, Sophie. You made your choice. Now, you get to live with it. The next few days were a whirlwind of cancelled plans, vendors pulling out, and Sophie scrambling to salvage whatever remained of her wedding. The fallout from my decision was more than just financial, it was emotional, too. Sophie had lost the trust of everyone involved. The guests who had been looking forward to attending the wedding, the people who had been excited to see the day come to fruition, all saw it fall apart. And at the center of it all, Sophie stood, trying to pick up the pieces of a shattered dream. I had my revenge. She had humiliated me. Now, it was my turn to make her face the consequences of her actions. But the best part wasn't just watching her fail, it was seeing her realize that no one could fix what she had broken. Not even the biological father who had come into the picture too late to save her. The reality was clear, Sophie was alone. And it was a feeling she was going to have to get used to.